Well, first of all, Saroyan was a Beatley. Very important to a young man whose elders pointed out who the Beatleys were. I mean, when we'd go to Chatuni Market, they would tell us over and over again, they're Beatleys, the Chatunis. Hanoian's Market was Harpetsi, and Michael Agopian once said to me, he said, well, the old saying, the Harpetsis went to Hanoian's Market, the Beatleys went to Chatuni's Market. And it was true. And so, and by the way, not just Chatuni, but to Ararat Grocery, which was in Old Armenia town, because they were Beatleys also. So Saroyan was a Beatley, and we knew that, and he was a bigger-than-life character. He had left Fresno, and he came to lecture at USC one day. And I saw the poster that he was going to lecture at Hancock Auditorium. And so I wandered over there expecting that it would be just another off-campus speaker. And it was jammed. They had speaker phones outside and people sitting in all the aisles and against every inch of the wall. And I was blown away by this. So I wiggled in and listened to Saroyan, who had a meandering way of talking, where he wouldn't stick to one subject. He would meander around, come back to things, a unfocused way of speaking. And so when his speech was over, of course, all the other people who were there were not Armenians. They were there because this great Pulitzer Prize winner was going to be speaking on campus. So you had all the English literature and comparative lit people there at the university who were attending. So when it was over, he was selling books up in front, sitting behind a desk, and he'd ask the student his name, and he'd write something to the student and sell the book. And I waited until he was almost finished, and I went up and I said, I knew he knew my family very well because he lived right behind my grandmother, his family, and my grandmother's family, which would have been my father, my uncle, my aunts, lived right across the alley. So I was there much of the time as you were at your grandmother's house, and they lived right across the alley. So I went up to him and I said, Bill, I'm Walter Karabian from Fresno. He went like this. He said, stop. He said, are you John's boy or Tex's boy? Now, my Uncle Frank, Antranik it really was, but my Uncle Frank was called Tex by people. I said, well, I'm John's boy. He said, do you see this boy? Booming voice to the audience. Do you see this boy? This is Hosep and Haiganusha's grandson. Now, it took me a couple of minutes to focus on my grandfather's name because he had died long before I was born. So I didn't really know Hosep Karabian, but I knew Haiganush, of course, my grandmother. She lived until I was in high school. And he said, you see this boy? This is Hosep and Haiganush's grandson. He says, in his veins flows the blood of Beatleys. Now I'm looking for something to crawl under. All these USC co-eds are around looking at this guy like, what is he talking about? The blood of Beatleys. But he didn't care. I was a Beatley, and he was delighted to see me. And then as the years went on, he would correspond with me more and more. And I have many books and letters of his in which he would doodle in some of the books and write letters in some of them. And I remember you could boil down his advice to basically two issues. Number one, he constantly advocated more comedy in politics. You have to bring more laughter into politics. You have to bring more comedy into politics. Well, I was doing the best I can to get through, to just make my presence known, let alone trying to be Jack Benny or something like that. And then the other one was he was very much against the death penalty. And I always suspected, because then Senator George Deukmejian was so pro the death penalty, talked about it, introduced many bills on it, was dedicated to the death penalty, almost to an unnatural amount, that he saw in me somebody he could talk to as a counterbalance to Deukmejian's avid commitment for the death penalty. And I voted with Deukmejian one time and voted against him 2 or 3 times. And Saroyan was always proud of me and writing me letters when I voted against the death penalty. Let me add something about Saroyan. Saroyan, in his later years, lived in Fresno and rode a bicycle around town. And people made jokes about him and so forth. But he was a very witty and clever guy. For instance, do you know that famous song, "Come On to My House, Come On"? That was sung by Rosemary Clooney, who I think is George Clooney's aunt. And there's great belief in our community that Rosemary Clooney was an Armenian, which would make George Clooney part Armenian. In any case, that was written by Ross Bagdasarian and William Saroyan. And that part most people don't know. They were driving across the nation in Saroyan's Cadillac, and they did the words, the lyrics, to "Come On to My House, Come On." And it's a very Armenian song. I'm going to give you lots of things, and there were Armenian foods they were giving, and Armenian pastries, and Armenian fruits and delicacies. So that was a part of William Saroyan that the public maybe never saw, but those of us looking back put 2 and 2 together and came out with that. In Sacramento, I got there as one of the unfavored or opponents to Jesse Unruh's speakership. Not that I had done anything against Jesse Unruh, I hadn't, but because I hadn't been for him. And when he came with money to help me in the campaign, I just didn't want to entangle myself with him, and I was doing a good job of raising funds myself. So I told him I had plenty of money and I didn't need it. Well, this story got all around Sacramento, somebody turning down campaign contributions. But I stuck to it. It worked out okay for me. So I got up there and I was put on some committees and I paid attention to them and I wanted to do a good job. But in later years, I found out that some of the committees I was on, Fish and Game and Military and Veterans Affairs, were like the Siberia committees in that nobody wanted to serve on those committees. But I put my nose to the grindstone and did the best work I could on those committees. Eventually, they proved to be highly beneficial to me in the later years in the legislature, that I had had experience on committees that most of the members had not had. Most of the members wanted to be on government organization that handled the liquor industry and horse racing, or finance and insurance because it handled the insurance companies, or Ways and Means, which handled the state budget. And I just never got started in those, and so I stayed in what would be called the second class or third class of the committees, and it proved to be very beneficial in the long run.